The table's only for your brother's family, Dad said on the phone. We'll invite you next time. I still remember the way his voice sounded that morning, cheerful, almost apologetic, as if he hadn't just said the most familiar kind of rejection I'd known my whole life. He didn't mean to hurt me. He never did. But words like that gentle casual cut clean when they've lived in your skin for years. What he didn't know was that this time, the celebrated restaurant he'd secured a reservation at for Thanksgiving dinner, the one he'd been so proud to mention for weeks, belonged to me. It was the Thursday before Thanksgiving, one of those brittle November mornings in Portland, when the air smells like wood smoke and salt. The city felt half asleep, the kind of quiet that made you notice your own breath. I stood in the front dining room of the Willow Room, my restaurant, my second home, and watched the sunlight crawl across the tabletops like slow fire. We'd been open for 3 years, long enough for the scent of roasted herbs to live in the walls, but still new enough that I checked every wine glass for fingerprints myself. Thanksgiving week was always chaos: bookings, deliveries, special menus, but I thrived on it. Order, timing, precision. In the kitchen, those things made sense. Families didn't. The phone call came just after 7. I almost didn't answer. The screen flashed Dad and my thumb hesitated. But curiosity or habit won. "Morning, Clara," he said, voice too bright. "Are you working again this holiday?" I smiled to myself. "When am I not?" He laughed, and for a moment it almost felt easy. Then he said it. "The restaurant we're going to this year, the Willow Room, you know it. Anyway, the table's only got space for your brother's family. But we'll invite you next time." Just like that, the sound of his voice became a distant buzz, and a cold certainty settled right beneath my sternum, heavy as stone. I leaned against the counter, gripping the phone tighter. "The Willow Room," I repeated carefully. "That's quite a choice." "Yeah," he said, oblivious. "Everyone says it's impossible to get a reservation. Daniel's kids are so excited. It'll be nice to try something special, you know. You should really check it out sometime." There was a pause long enough for the hum of the refrigerator to fill it. Then I said lightly, "Maybe I will." He sighed, as if trying to soften the blow. "I know it's tough, Clara, but with the kids, the space—" "Don't worry about it, Dad," I interrupted. "I've got plans." He chuckled, relieved. Good. We'll catch up at Christmas." "Yeah." "Sure," I said. "Next time." When I hung up, the silence pressed in like fog. I stared at the empty room around me, the polished wooden tables, the golden light spilling through the windows, the vase of late chrysanthemums near the counter. This was my place, my dream, and somehow he didn't even know it. By the time my general manager, Evan, arrived, I'd already triple-checked the reservations list. "Big week ahead," he said, shaking the rain from his jacket. "We've got a full house through Sunday, even a VIP family booked for Thanksgiving dinner named Porter." The pen in my hand stilled. First name I asked, even though I didn't need to. He scanned the list. Harold Porter. Party of 10. Private dining room. 6 p.m. A dry laugh cracked in my throat before I could stop it. "Of course." Evan looked up. Something funny, I forced a smile. "Just irony. Go ahead and confirm their menu." He hesitated. "You okay, perfect?" I said too fast. "Absolutely perfect." When he left, I sat in my office for a long time staring at the glowing screen. The reservation glared back at me, the letters sharp and personal. Harold Porter. 10 guests. Thanksgiving evening. For a while I just looked at it, my cursor blinking like a heartbeat beside the cancel button. The thought of pressing it was tempting. Cathartic even. But no, that would be too easy. Too small. There was a sharper kind of revenge, the kind that didn't raise its voice. I'd let the evening unfold exactly as planned. The morning passed in a blur of motion, ordering produce, checking deliveries, approving schedules. My staff moved with the quiet precision I loved: knives glinting, pens hissing, laughter muffled by the rhythm of work. It was beautiful, controlled, and predictable. Everything my family wasn't. When Evan brought the last inventory sheet, he paused at the door. "You know," he said, "it's funny. Every holiday you say you'll take a day off, but you never do." I smiled without looking up. "That's because the kitchen doesn't disappoint me." He chuckled, assuming it was a joke. I didn't correct him. After he left, I sat back in my chair, phone still on the counter beside me. Dad's words echoed faintly, each one more absurd than the last. The Willow Room. You should try it sometime. I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was closer to a sigh. He didn't mean harm. He never did. But every time he chose Daniel, his golden boy, his mirror image over me, it carved something permanent. A quiet scar that success couldn't quite cover. I had spent years proving him wrong: culinary school scholarships, back-to-back awards, 2 Michelin stars. And yet here I was, still the daughter, without a seat. At noon, the rain began again, drumming softly against the window panes. The restaurant felt suspended between seasons, warm inside, gray outside. I walked to the glass and watched the droplets chase each other down. In the reflection, I saw a woman who had built everything she wanted and still didn't know how to stop wanting more. That was when the phone buzzed again. Another message from Dad. Sorry if that sounded harsh earlier. You know how space gets tight. Maybe we can do Christmas together. Always next time. Always later. I stared at the text until the letters blurred, then locked the screen. The cursor on the reservation list still blinked steady and patient. I placed my hand on the mouse, hovered over the cancel option, then stopped. No, not yet. The satisfaction wouldn't come from shutting him out. It would come from letting him in, letting him see exactly who I'd become without his permission. I whispered to the empty room, let's see how it feels when the door opens for me and closes for him. Outside, the rain eased the sky, breaking into pale light. Inside, the air smelled of rosemary butter and something sharper: anticipation. That evening, after everyone left, I walked through the empty dining room again. The lights glowed low, soft amber, spilling across the tables. I paused by the private dining room, his dining room, and ran my fingers along the edge of the door. Soon he would sit here, surrounded by family laughter, wine, and not know he was sitting inside the world I'd built from the scraps he left me. For a long moment I stood there, my heartbeat sinking with the faint hum of the city outside. Then I whispered, barely audible even to myself, tomorrow I won't just serve dinner. I'll serve silence, the kind that makes people listen. I turned off the lights and walked out into the cold night, my reflection trailing behind me in the glass. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving Eve, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one waiting to be invited. The morning of Thanksgiving Eve started in silence, the kind that fills a room before the storm. I arrived at the Willow Room before sunrise, the city still draped in a soft fog. The air outside smelled like wet leaves and cold metal, but inside everything was warm and humming with quiet life. The kitchen lights flickered on one by one, bouncing off the stone-tiled floors. I liked that sound, the slow waking of a space that belonged entirely to me. Evan was already there, of course, leaning against the counter with his coffee mug. "Morning, chef," he said, handing me the clipboard. "Deliveries came in early. We've got fresh apples, cranberries, and the pecans you asked for." "Perfect," I replied, skimming the list. "We'll start prep as soon as the oven's warm." He hesitated. "You sure you don't want it closed tomorrow?" "Just for once it's Thanksgiving." I smiled faintly. "You know I don't do holidays." He gave a knowing nod. "Yeah, but the staff might. You could just saying, let someone else take charge for a day." "I'll think about it," I lied. He knew I wouldn't. By 6, the kitchen came alive, the hiss of butter meeting hot pans, the thud of knives on cutting boards, the rhythm of early morning prep. I moved through the controlled environment, my presence the quiet center of the action. It felt safe, predictable. Control was my comfort. When the pastry chef Nora brought over the first batch of apple pies, the scent filled the room. Cinnamon, sugar, butter, all the smells that used to mean home. I inhaled deeply, remembering Mom's kitchen before everything fell apart. She'd hum while peeling apples, her sleeves rolled up her hair, escaping the bun she never quite managed to keep neat. Dad would come in, kiss her cheek, and she'd smile like forgiveness was just part of her recipe. That was before the silences started, before every meal turned into an argument disguised as conversation. Clara Evans' voice pulled me back. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, blinking hard. Just thinking. He studied me for a moment, then went back to his notes. He didn't push, and I was grateful. By 10, the reservation board was full and every table was polished to perfection. I stood near the host stand, scanning the list one more time. There it was again, Harold Porter party of 10. Private dining room, 6:00 p.m. It started back like a challenge I hadn't yet accepted. My phone buzzed on the counter. Dad again. We're bringing the kids a bit early tomorrow, the message read. They can't wait to see the restaurant. Daniel says it's supposed to be incredible. I could almost hear his voice, proud, casual. He had no idea. I deleted the text and walked to my office. The sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, catching the framed newspaper article on the wall, The Willow Room, Portland's Hidden Jewel. Beneath the headline was a photo of me standing behind the counter, arms folded, smile tight, but confident. The reporter had asked me what inspired the name. I'd said, because willows bend but they don't break. It sounded poetic at the time. Now it felt like a warning. I sank into the leather chair, staring at the reservation list again. My cursor hovered over my father's name. I thought about erasing him the way he'd erased me from every holiday photo for the last decade. But I couldn't. Not yet. I wanted him to sit in my restaurant, eat my food, and not even realize whose table he was at. The intercom buzzed. Chef Nora said the supplier's here with the last delivery. Be right there, I said, standing. When I opened the kitchen door, a rush of warm air and laughter hit me. The team was in full motion now, Evan checking orders, the sous chefs plating test dishes, Nora dusting pies with sugar. It felt alive, almost joyful. And yet beneath it all I felt something brewing, a strange cold certainty beneath my heart, the quiet before something irreversible. At noon, Evan handed me the finalized seating chart. We've got 12 private parties tomorrow. You want to go over them? I flipped through until I reached the last page. Harold Porter. Confirmed. He noticed my pause. Something wrong? No, I said. Everything's exactly right. He frowned slightly. You're sure about this dinner? I mean, it's Thanksgiving, Clara. Most chefs take a night off, spend it with their families. I met his eyes. This is my family. He nodded slowly, then turned back to the kitchen. I stood there a moment longer, listening to the clatter of pots and pans. The air smelled of time and something deeper, anticipation. My father was about to step into the one place where his approval was irrelevant to my existence, and I was the one holding the keys. By late afternoon, the light outside faded to silver. The city beyond the windows blurred under a thin drizzle. I sat at my desk, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room, and replayed the past in flashes, Dad's voice telling me to be practical, Daniel's easy charm stealing every spotlight, the way I'd smiled through every slight like it didn't sting. Now, after years of silence, he'd booked a table at my restaurant. Not to see me, not to make amends, just for convenience. A knock at the door startled me. Evan again, holding a folded piece of paper. Delivery for you, he said. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note on crisp stationery. Looking forward to dinner tomorrow night. Heard the chef's excellent. Maybe we'll finally get to try something worth bragging about. Dad. For a moment I just stared at the handwriting. That looping, self-assured scrawl. The irony was almost cruel. Everything okay? Evan asked quietly. I nodded, folding the note. Better than okay. When he left, I set the note on the counter beside the reservation list. The two looked almost poetic together, his pride and my proof. I turned off the office light and walked back into the dining room. The chandeliers glowed low, reflecting off the glassware. I stood there, picturing my father's face when he realized. Would he be proud? Embarrassed? Maybe neither. Maybe just stunned into silence the way I'd been my whole life. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights shimmered through the wet windows, soft and golden. I pressed my hand to the glass, feeling the cool seep through. Tomorrow night he'll sit at my table. Tomorrow night the silence would end one way or another. As I locked the doors and stepped into the empty street, a sense of calm settled over me, deep and deliberate. Thanksgiving would come as it always did. But this time, it would taste different. This time the table was mine. Thanksgiving morning broke with a quiet kind of light, soft gray, unassuming. I'd been awake since 4, long before the city started to stir. The Willow Room was empty except for me and the hum of the refrigerators, the air heavy with the faint sweetness of baked apples and the sharp bite of coffee. This was the hour I liked best, the stillness before the noise when everything felt possible, and nothing yet had gone wrong. By 6, the first wave of staff began to arrive. Nora came in carrying a box of cinnamon sticks. Evan followed behind her balancing 2 trays of pastries and a mug of coffee that was definitely for me. "You're impossible," he said, handing it over. "You've been here all night again, haven't you?" I took a sip and smiled. "I prefer the word dedicated." "Uh-huh." He glanced around the spotless kitchen. "Or haunted. Take your pick." The banter was easy practiced. We'd known each other long enough that he didn't ask the kind of questions he knew I wouldn't answer. Outside, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining. Inside, everything smelled like warmth and purpose. At 8, the delivery started. Produce crates, wine boxes, flowers for the tables. Evan checked each one meticulously, but my mind wasn't on logistics. It was on the name printed in block letters at the bottom of the reservation chart, Harold Porter. Party of 10. Private dining room. I hadn't told anyone who he was. To them, he was just another wealthy client, the kind who expected to be catered to, deferred to, obeyed. To me, he was a test I hadn't realized I'd been studying for my whole life. By mid-morning, the restaurant buzzed with movement. Nora rolled out dough for the pies, humming quietly under her breath. Leo, my sous chef, was chopping herbs with mechanical precision. Evan oversaw the dining room setup, candles. Tablecloths, glassware aligned just so. Everything gleamed. Everything was perfect. "Private dining room's ready," Evan said, appearing at my side. "You want to take a look?" I followed him through the archway and stopped in the doorway. The room glowed in amber light, soft and inviting. The long table was draped in linen 10 chairs, evenly spaced. A centerpiece of dried flowers and pine cones ran down the middle. To anyone else, it looked like the ideal Thanksgiving setting. To me, it looked like irony in bloom. Evan studied my face. "Not right." "It's perfect," I said quietly. "Exactly how it should be." He frowned, sensing something I wasn't saying. "You seem tense. Just tired." I lied. But fatigue wasn't the word. It was something else, an ache that sat behind my ribs, familiar and heavy. When he left, I stood alone in that room, letting my eyes trace the details. The flicker of the candles, the reflection of light in the wine glasses, the faint echo of footsteps from the kitchen. For a second I pictured it, my father walking through the door, his confident stride, his easy smile that had fooled people for years. Daniel right behind him with his wife and kids. My brother, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. They'd sit there laughing, passing plates, talking about how lucky they were to get a reservation here, never once realizing they were sitting in the middle of the life I built from the ashes they left me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the spell. "Dad. Running late but can't wait for dinner. Daniel says you'd love this place." I laughed out loud, a sound so dry it cracked in my throat. "Oh, I do," I murmured. By noon, the first customers arrived for lunch service. Couples, small families, a few tourists who'd wandered in early. I moved between tables, smiling, chatting, pretending everything was normal. But underneath, every minute felt like waiting for a storm you could smell before it hit. Around 2, Evan caught me at the bar, clipboard in hand. "We just got a call," he said. "Your VIP party wants to confirm their menu. They're requesting the apple pie as a finale." Of course they were. Mom's pie. The one recipe she'd taught me before she died. The one dish that still carried her voice like an echo. I could almost hear her humming as she peeled the apples, saying, "The secret's in the patience, honey. Don't rush sweetness." My throat tightened. "Tell them it's handled," I said. He nodded, still watching me. "You sure you don't want to take tomorrow off? We can handle brunch." "You could, Evan," I said softly. "I need to be here." He exhaled. "All right. But if you burn out, don't say I didn't warn you. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I won't burn out. The truth was, I'd been burning for years. By 4, the restaurant began to shift. The music softened, the candles were lit, and the air filled with sharp anticipation. Staff moved quickly, voices low, focused. Evan reviewed final notes while Nora carried in tray after tray of golden pies. Then, just before 6, the phone rang. The host picked up, nodded, then turned to me. "Chef, the Porter party just called. They're running 15 minutes late." "Of course they are," I said. "Hold their table." When the host turned away, I walked into the private dining room again. The table waited silent, expectant. 10 seats, 10 place cards, 10 perfectly folded napkins. Everything is ready. I stood there a long time, my hand resting on the back of my father's chair. I could almost see him sitting there, talking over me, talking past me as he'd always done. I thought of every Thanksgiving I'd spent alone, every next time that never came. And now, here we were. The irony tasted like ash in my mouth. In the distance, I heard laughter from the main dining room, families gathering, toasts being made, the sound of belonging. My chest tightened. Then quietly I whispered to the empty table, "Let's see how it feels to eat at my mercy for once." The words hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the first snow began to fall, soft, slow, almost gentle. Inside, everything was ready. The staff had no idea what tonight meant to me. To them it was another service, another night to impress. But to me it was years of silence finally breaking open. As I turned off the lights in the private room, I caught my reflection in the glass, a steady, composed woman with flour on her sleeves and a storm behind her eyes. Tomorrow he would see me. Not the daughter who was never enough. Not the forgotten one. But the woman who built her own table. Thanksgiving evening arrived wrapped in a hush of falling snow. The city outside was muted, a watercolor of gold and white, its lights appearing distant like warmth Clara couldn't reach. Inside the willow room, everything gleamed. The silverware caught the glow of the chandeliers. The air smelled faintly of roasted herbs and cinnamon, and every table was full. Except one. The private dining room waited. 10 empty seats, 10 plates, 10 silent witnesses. I stood at the edge of the dining floor, pretending to read through the reservation ledger while my heart kept its own rhythm, steady, deliberate, braced for impact. At 5:55, the front door swung open, letting in a gust of cold and laughter. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. I could feel it, the old familiar mix of dread and defiance curling in my stomach. "Reservation for Porter," the hostess said brightly. "Right on time," my father's voice replied. It had been years since I'd heard him in person, but the sound hadn't changed. Warm, commanding, threaded with the kind of confidence that comes from always assuming the world will make room for you. I stayed still, half hidden by the archway. I could see them through the reflection in the glass, the whole family sweeping in with winter coats and chatter. Daniel, my older brother, was laughing, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Their kids darted toward the fireplace, giddy with the novelty of snow. And there, behind them, was my father. His gray hair neatly combed, his scarf perfectly folded. His presence filling the room, pushing the air out of my lungs the way it always had. He glanced around with the faint air of a man appraising property he already owned. "Beautiful place," he said. "Feels familiar somehow." I almost smiled. The hostess led them through the dining area toward the private room. I stepped back out of sight, but close enough to hear his voice trailing behind her. "Fine craftsmanship," he was saying. "The attention to detail remarkable. You can always tell when an owner actually cares." Oh, I cared all right. Once they were seated, I took a deep breath and walked toward the kitchen. Evan was there, overseeing the first course with his usual calm precision. "Your VIPs have arrived," he said, checking his watch. I noticed, I said. He looked up. "You want to greet them? Standard courtesy for private parties." I met his eyes. "Not yet." He nodded slowly, unsure what I was planning, but wise enough not to ask. From the service window, I could see the private dining room. My father lifted his glass, smiling, his voice carrying faintly through the hum of the restaurant. To family, he said the words sounding hollow like a toast given out of obligation. The toast landed like a slap I refused to feel. The first course went out a butternut squash bisque with roasted seeds and a drizzle of sage oil. I watched as Nora carefully placed each bowl onto the trays. Her hands were steady, practiced. "You're sure you don't want me to send Evan in to do the greeting?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "I'll go?" She blinked, surprised. Now I nodded. Now. I smoothed my apron, took a breath that felt too shallow, and pushed open the door to the private dining room. The laughter dimmed when I stepped in. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then my father looked up, his expression shifting from polite interest to stunned confusion. "Clara," he said, standing halfway. "What on earth? What are you doing here? I work here," I said evenly. "Welcome to the Willow Room." Daniel blinked, glancing between us. "Wait, this is your place." I smiled faintly. "It is." The silence that followed was thick enough to slice through. My father's mouth opened-closed, then opened again. "You're joking." "No," I said. "I don't joke about my livelihood." He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "You own this restaurant. I built it," I corrected. "From the ground up." His expression wavered between disbelief and something else, embarrassment maybe. "Well," he said finally, forcing a chuckle. "That's quite an accomplishment." "Thank you," I said. "I hear it's hard to get a reservation." Daniel shifted in his chair, his discomfort visible. "Clara, we didn't realize Dad didn't mean—" "It's fine," I said. "Enjoy your meal." I turned to leave, but my father stopped me. "Clara, wait." I paused in the doorway. The hum of the restaurant bleeding faintly from beyond. "This isn't how the family handles things," he said. "We didn't mean to leave you out. You know how space gets— Space isn't the problem, Dad." I said, turning back to face him. "It never was." He frowned, the authority slipping from his tone. "Then what is—" I stepped closer, my voice quiet but steady. "You said the table was full. I just wanted you to see what that looks like from the other side." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the slow tick of the wall clock. Then Daniel cleared his throat, his voice low. "You're really not going to let this go, are you?" "Let it go," I repeated softly. "You're sitting in it." My father's jaw tightened. "This is childish, Clara. You can't just— I said, cutting him off. "Because I own the table." The words landed heavier than I intended. His face reddened. His shoulders stiffened, but I didn't flinch. Finally, he straightened his coat. "We'll find somewhere else to eat," he said coldly. "Good luck," I said. "Everything decent's been booked for weeks." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned toward the door. Daniel hesitated, looking torn between loyalty and shame. His wife avoided my eyes. The kids looked confused, sensing tension they couldn't name. When the door closed behind them, I stood there in the silence they left behind. 10 untouched bowls of soup cooled on the table, steam rising slowly like ghosts fading from the room. Evan appeared a moment later, his face pale. "What happened?" I exhaled. "Dinner's canceled." He blinked. "You canceled it?" "They did," I said. He studied me, uncertain whether to push. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll handle it." As he left, I turned back to the table. The candles flickered. The room still smelled of sage and roasted squash, but everything felt hollow. I ran my hand across the linen still warm from where their plates had been. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was something quieter, heavier. For the first time, the silence didn't cut. It settled. Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the street in white. Inside, the Willow Room hummed softly, untouched, unbothered. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need an invitation. By midnight, the Willow Room was silent again. The candles had burned low, their wicks curling into smoke. The air still carried the scent of roasted herbs and apple pie, but everything felt different now, hollow like a song after the last note fades. I sat alone at one of the smaller tables, a half-empty glass of wine in front of me, my reflection shimmering on its surface. The night outside was still snowing, white flakes drifting through the streetlights, looking like silent confetti for a victory that felt meaningless. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. I'd told myself this was what I wanted. Justice. Balance. My father had walked out of the restaurant, humiliated Daniel silent beside him, the rest of the family trailing like shadows. I'd stood my ground. I'd spoken the truth. I'd finally made him see me. But now that it was done, the room felt too big. Too quiet. Evan came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, his expression careful. "The last of the staff clocked out," he said. "Everyone's gone." I nodded. "Thanks, Evan. Go home too. I'll lock up." He hesitated. "You sure it's late?" "Yeah." He lingered a moment longer, studying my face. "You did what you needed to do," he said softly. "Sometimes that's the only way people learn." Maybe I said. Or maybe it's just another way to keep score. He didn't answer. He just nodded and slipped out the door, clicking shut behind him. The sound of the lock echoed in the empty room. I stared at the wine glass for a long time before picking it up and draining the rest. The bitterness wasn't from the wine. I walked toward the private dining room, the scene of the crime, if you could call it that. The candles there had gone out completely, leaving only a faint trace of smoke curling upward. The table was still set, the bowls of soup untouched, the napkins folded like they were waiting for a family that never came back. I ran a finger along the rim of one glass. Cold, smooth, lifeless. For years I'd dreamed of a moment like that, of standing tall, while my father finally understood how deeply he'd wounded me. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. I was halfway back to my office when my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. I hesitated before pressing play. "Clara," my father's voice said, low and controlled the way it always got when he was angry. "That display tonight was uncalled for. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed your family. Whatever issues you think you're settling, this wasn't the way. Call me tomorrow." Click. I deleted it without saving it. Then came the next one, left 15 minutes later. "Clara, I shouldn't have said that. I was just surprised. I didn't know. We'll talk later, all right?" The next came an hour after that. His voice was weaker this time. "You always did things your own way. Maybe I should have seen this coming. I'll call you in the morning. Get some sleep." I didn't reply to any of them. I just sat at my desk, staring at the blinking notification light until it stopped. By the time dawn began bleeding into the sky, I'd gone through every emotion I could name: anger, satisfaction, guilt, confusion, and ended up with a cold, hollow ache right behind my sternum where satisfaction should have been. The next afternoon, I went back to the restaurant early. Evan was already there, wiping down the bar. He looked up when I came in. "You've got about 100 missed calls," he said carefully. "Mostly from the same number." I froze. "My father," he nodded. "And your brother. He came by this morning. Said your dad wasn't feeling great last night." A cold ripple moved through me. Not feeling great, how Evan hesitated. He didn't say. Just asked me to tell you to call him. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers suddenly clumsy. The screen lit up, missed calls 42. Voicemails 7. The newest one was from an unknown number. I pressed play. "Ms. Porter, this is Mercy General Hospital. Your father, Harold Porter, was admitted early this morning. Please contact us as soon as possible." The world tilted. For a second, I couldn't move. The words hung there heavy and unreal. Evan's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. "Clara." "What is it?" I looked up, my throat dry. "He's in the hospital." The drive there was a blur. The streets were slick with melting snow, the city moving in slow motion around me. Every traffic light felt like a punishment. Every second, another thought: what if this is my fault? What if I went too far? When I reached the hospital, the air smelled like antiseptic and fear. The nurse scanned the screen, her gaze lingering just a second too long on the name before she said, "Room 412, she said gently. "He's stable for now." Stable. The word didn't comfort me. I found Daniel sitting outside the room, elbows on his knees, eyes red. He looked up when he saw me. "You came," he said flatly. "I got the message." He nodded once. "Heart attack. They said it was mild, but he collapsed not long after leaving your place." I sank into the chair beside him, the noise of the hospital dull and far away. Was it because of I started? "Don't," Daniel said, shaking his head. "Don't make this about guilt. He's alive. That's what matters." But guilt was already seeping in slow and steady. Through the glass I could see my father lying pale against the white sheet's tubes tracing from his hand to a monitor that beeped in steady rhythm. He looked smaller somehow, fragile, in a way I'd never seen. The sight of him so small erased every image of the confident, commanding father I had spent my life trying to defy. I pressed my hand to the glass. "He'll be fine," I whispered mostly to myself. Daniel exhaled. "You know what's strange? He wouldn't stop talking about you before he passed out. Said he should have been proud. Said you built something real." My throat tightened. "He said that, yeah." Daniel's voice softened. "Said he finally understood what you were trying to prove." I turned away, blinking hard, but the tears still came. For years I'd chased that validation. For years I'd imagined him saying those words. And now when he finally did, it came wrapped in hospital linen and the smell of sterilized air. Daniel put a hand on my shoulder. "Go in. He's been asking for you." I stood, my hand trembling on the doorknob. Inside, the steady beep of the monitor filled the room like a clock ticking down forgiveness. When his eyes opened and found mine, I couldn't tell which one of us looked more surprised. "Clara," he whispered. "You came." I swallowed hard, my voice barely a breath. "Yeah, Dad, I came." And for the first time in my life, I didn't know whether I was there to apologize or to listen. The hospital was too bright. The light was harsh and cold, exposing every tremor in my father's hand, every truth I'd spent my life trying to outrun. I stood just inside the doorway, my fingers clenched around the strap of my bag. My father looked impossibly small in that bed, his skin gray beneath the fluorescent glow, his once commanding hands pale against the sheets. Machines beeped softly beside him, the rhythm steady and maddening. He opened his eyes slowly as if surfacing from some deep place. When he saw me, something flickered there, relief maybe. Or regret. "You came," he said again, his voice little more than a whisper. "I did." He gave a faint, rueful smile. "Didn't think you would." "Neither did I admitted. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that used to live in our house, the one that came after arguments no one would name. He cleared his throat weakly. "The doctor says it wasn't a big one. Mild, they called it." "Mild," I repeated. "That's one word for it." He looked away toward the window. Snow had started falling again, flakes drifting past the glass in lazy spirals. "It's strange," he said. "You spend your whole life thinking you're in control and then one moment snap." He tried to snap his fingers, but they trembled instead. "Turns out you're not." I didn't know what to say to that. He must have sensed it because his tone softened. "You've done well for yourself, Clara. Better than I ever imagined." I stared at the floor. "That's generous considering you didn't imagine much." He winced but didn't argue. "Fair enough." The nurse came in to check his vitals. Her polite smile was a bright, fragile thing in the tense air between us. She adjusted a few wires and whispered something about rest before leaving us alone again. The door clicked shut behind her, and suddenly it was just us two people bound by blood and years of silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "About the restaurant. About all of it." I looked up. "Would you have cared?" He exhaled, closing his eyes for a moment. "You think so little of me?" "I think exactly of what you taught me," I said, my voice steady. "You told me to stop chasing impossible things. You said cooking wasn't a real career, that passion didn't pay bills. You said I was—" He finished the sentence for me. "Too emotional to succeed." The words hung between us, brittle as glass. He rubbed his temples. "I said a lot of things I shouldn't have." "Yeah," I said softly. "You did." For a long time, the only sound was the monitor beeping beside his bed. Then he said I was wrong. I blinked. What I was wrong about you, he said again, his voice breaking slightly. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment, from failure. But all I did was make you smaller in my own eyes. And that— He paused, swallowing hard. That's something I can't take back. The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd wanted an apology for years, but I never imagined it would sound so fragile, honest, and unarmored. I sat down in the chair beside the bed. You know, I said quietly, I didn't build that restaurant to prove you wrong. He looked at me surprised. I built it because I needed somewhere to feel like I belonged. And if you weren't going to give me a seat at your table, I had to build my own. His eyes glistened. You did, he whispered. You built something beautiful. The admission hung in the air like a fragile truce. For the first time in years, I saw him not as the man who'd left me out, but as a man who'd been left behind by his own pride, his own choices. He closed his eyes, his breathing slow but steady. Your mother would have been proud, he murmured. My throat tightened. You don't know that. I do, he said. She always believed in you, even when I didn't. That undid me more than anything else could have. I sat there for what felt like hours, the light outside fading from white to gold to gray. Nurses came and went, checking machines, changing IV bags, whispering gentle instructions. But my father and I stayed suspended in that in-between, halfway between past and forgiveness. At one point, he turned to me, his voice barely above a breath. Clara, promise me something. What? Don't let anger be the last thing between us. Don't let that be what you remember. I swallowed hard. I don't know if I can promise that. He gave a faint smile. Then promise you'll try. I can do that, I said softly. He nodded, his eyes already closing again, his breathing deepening into the slow rhythm of sleep. I stayed a while longer, watching the snow gather on the windowsill, melting and forming again. It reminded me of something Mom used to say when I was little, that forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's the kind you keep having to reopen. When I finally stood to leave, I brushed my hand against his, the first time I'd touched him in years. His skin was cool, fragile, but he didn't flinch. I'll come back tomorrow, I whispered. Outside the hospital, the air bit at my cheeks, but it didn't sting the way it used to. The city was quiet, the snow falling soft and steady, blanketing everything in a kind of mercy. As I walked toward my car, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of anger. I was carrying something lighter, something that felt dangerously close to grace. The next morning, the city woke up beneath a pale winter sun. Boston looked scrubbed, raw streets, slick with melting snow, the sky a soft blue stretched thin over the skyline. I hadn't slept much. My father's words still looped in my head. Don't let anger be the last thing between us. I sat at my kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling beside me, staring at the hospital visitor badge still pinned to my coat. It felt strange how a piece of paper could carry so much weight. I'd gone there expecting resentment, maybe more arguments. What I found instead was something fragile and unexpected remorse. The knock on my door came just as the sun broke through the clouds. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, Daniel stood there, coat dusted with snow, hands buried in his pockets. He looked older than I remembered, maybe because for the first time he didn't look sure of himself. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded. Coffee's still warm. He stepped inside, glancing around like he was afraid of disturbing something. You live alone. Always have, I said. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Figures. We sat at the table, the silence between us both awkward and familiar. He rubbed his hands together, finally pulling something from his pocket, a small box wrapped in tissue paper. Dad wanted you to have this. I frowned, taking it slowly. The paper was soft, almost worn through. Inside was a gold locket, oval, delicate, old-fashioned. My breath caught. I thought this was lost, I whispered. Daniel shook his head. He found it in Mom's things last year. Said she wanted you to have it when the time was right. I turned it over in my hands. The clasp clicked open easily, revealing a tiny photograph, Mom, flower on her cheek, smiling at something just out of frame. On the opposite side, a smaller photo, me no older than 8, missing my front teeth and grinning. The photograph felt like a fragile artifact from a life that demanded nothing but simple happiness. She used to wear it every Thanksgiving, Daniel said quietly. Said it kept her family close. I closed it carefully, the chain cool against my skin. I thought Dad threw this out after she died. He didn't, Daniel said. He just couldn't look at it. That hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I'd spent years painting my father as the villain maybe he was, but grief has a way of warping people. Maybe he hadn't known what to do with what was left of her. Daniel sipped his coffee, his eyes flicking up to mine. He's better this morning. Said you talked last night. I nodded. We did. He told me you forgave him. I didn't say that. Daniel smirked faintly. No, but you went to see him. That's something. I looked out the window. The snow had started to fall again, gentle and relentless. Forgiveness isn't a one-time thing, I said. It's practice. He leaned back. You sound like Mom. I smiled at that, though it ached. She'd like that. He hesitated, then said, You know Dad's been different lately. After Mom died, he buried himself in work and keeping the house running and pretending we were fine. You reminded him that we weren't. By cutting him out, I asked. No, Daniel said. By standing up for yourself. He didn't respect weakness. He only understood strength, and you gave him that in a language he couldn't ignore. I didn't know whether that made me proud or sad. Maybe both. He stood after a while, tucking his gloves into his coat. He wants to see you again tonight. Is he ready for that? Yeah, Daniel said, his smile small but real. He said to tell you he's been thinking about Thanksgiving. Said maybe next year should be different. Different how Daniel shrugged. His words, maybe she can host it. I laughed soft and disbelieving. At the Willow Room. He nodded. He said it's about time he earned a seat at your table. The words landed like a quiet peace offering. After Daniel left, I sat alone for a while, tracing the locket's edge between my fingers. I slipped it over my neck, the chain resting just below my collarbone. The gold warm from my hand felt like a silent, tiny weight of commitment. For the first time in years, I felt something close to anchored, no longer fighting the constant internal current of needing to prove myself. That afternoon, I went back to the restaurant. The Willow Room was empty, sunlight spilling across the decorative stone floor. Evan was there sorting invoices behind the bar. He looked up when he saw me. You look different, he said. I feel different, I admitted. He smiled. Your father okay? Getting there? Good. He hesitated, then nodded toward the window. The snow's supposed to keep up all week. People are already calling about the holiday dinner menu. I smiled faintly. Then we'll give them one they'll never forget. I walked to the private dining room, the one where it had all unraveled. The air inside was still but not empty. I ran my hand over the long table, remembering every word, every silence. This time the ghost felt softer. I opened the locket again, looking at my mother's face. She'd always said Thanksgiving wasn't about food, it was about coming home. For years I thought I didn't have one. Now standing there, I realized I'd built it with my own hands. That night I went back to the hospital. My father was sitting up this time, a newspaper spread on his lap. He looked up surprised but pleased. You came back, he said. I told you I would. His eyes dropped to the locket around my neck. For a moment he didn't speak. Then quietly, she'd be happy to see you wearing that. I nodded. Daniel told me you found it. He smiled faintly. I wasn't ready to look at it before. Now I think maybe I am. We talked for an hour about nothing and everything. The restaurant, Daniel's kids, the weather. But beneath it all, there was a new rhythm, unspoken, tentative, real. As I left, he called after me. Clara, I turned. Next Thanksgiving, he said. Save me a seat. I smiled. There's always a seat, Dad. Outside, the snow had stopped. The streetlights glowed soft and golden against the dark. And for the first time in my life, the world didn't feel like something I had to fight for. It felt like something I'd finally earned. The river was half frozen when I walked along its edge that Sunday morning. The river, half frozen, let the ice drift past the banks, sharp glittering pieces, moving on much like the rigid anger I was finally letting go. The world was quiet. Muffled by the cold, the silence so deep, it made my ears ring. I hadn't planned to come here. My feet brought me anyway. This was where I'd stood the day I opened the Willow Room for the first time. Back then, the city had felt too big, too loud. I'd whispered a promise to myself that day. You'll never need their approval again. And I'd kept it. For years, I'd built everything with that vow in mind, every plate, every table, every smile rehearsed until it looked effortless. Now, standing in the same spot, I wasn't sure if that promise had saved me or isolated me. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was a text from Evan, my general manager. Everything's ready for the charity luncheon tomorrow. Press is coming. Want me to handle it? I typed back, yes. Make sure they focus on the community, not me. Then after a pause, thank you, he replied simply, handled. I tucked the phone away and stared at the water. The reflection staring back at me looked softer. Not the guarded, untouchable woman who had canceled her father's reservation without blinking, but someone still figuring out what forgiveness felt like when it finally arrived. I thought about him, about the way his voice had cracked in the hospital, about the quiet smile when he saw me wearing Mom's locket. That memory sat heavy and warm in my chest. I'd spent my whole life waiting for him to see me. Now he finally had, and I didn't know what to do with it. A voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I figured I'd find you here. I turned. Daniel stood a few feet away, his breath fogging in the cold. He looked more relaxed than he had in years, hands in his coat pockets, a hint of a smile on his face. You always did have a thing for rivers, he said. Mom used to bring us here, I said. Remember she'd pack of those sandwiches that always got soggy by the time we ate them? He laughed. I used to trade mine with you because you hated mustard, and you hated turkey. We both smiled, the memory sitting between us like a small fire in the cold. He came closer. Dad's getting discharged tomorrow. They want him to rest, but knowing him, he'll try to mow the lawn by next week. That sounds like him. He's different, Clara. You got through to him in a way no one else ever did. I shook my head. It wasn't me. It was time. He finally ran out of ways to ignore what he'd lost. Daniel watched me for a moment. You know, he told me something before I left the hospital last night. He said he spent years trying to raise you into someone he could understand instead of someone he could love. The words landed a quiet, deep blow that didn't hurt, but simply rearranged something heavy inside my chest. He said that Daniel nodded. I think that was his way of saying sorry. I looked out at the water again, blinking back the burn behind my eyes. He doesn't have to say it. I get it now. We stood there in silence for a while, watching the ice drift past. Then Daniel nudged me lightly with his elbow. He also said you should bring back Mom's Thanksgiving pie next year. That made me laugh. He remembers that, of course. Said it was the only dessert she never burned. I smiled. That's not true. She burned plenty. She just hid it better. The laughter faded, replaced by the gentle weight of nostalgia. For the first time, remembering her didn't ache, it warmed. Daniel shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. You know Grace and the kids want to come visit the Willow Room next week. Think that's okay? Of course, I said. Tell them to come hungry. He nodded. Are you sure you're ready for that? I met his eyes. I think I'm finally ready for a lot of things. He smiled satisfied and turned toward the car. Don't stay out here too long. You'll freeze. I won't, I said. Go on. Tell Dad I'll see him tomorrow. When he was gone, I stayed a little longer. The sun had climbed higher now, catching the edges of the river in gold. The city hummed faintly behind me, car engines, distant laughter, the steady rhythm of life moving on. I reached up and touched the locket. Inside it, my mother's face smiled, eternally frozen in that small, perfect moment. I could almost hear her voice. Family isn't about fairness, sweetheart. It's about grace. I used to think she was wrong. That grace was just another word for surrender. But standing there now with the cold biting my skin and the city waking around me, I realized grace wasn't surrender, it was strength. It was the decision to stop fighting battles that didn't need winners. As I walked back toward my car, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Evan. "We got a call from the Herald. They want to feature you again, the woman who built her own table." I smiled faintly. "Tell them no." Then I added, This story isn't about me anymore." The road home curved along the water, sunlight spilling through the trees. I rolled down the window despite the cold, letting the air rush in. It smelled like snow and cinnamon, like the beginning of something new. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval or hiding from disappointment. I was simply moving forward. And as the river faded in my rearview mirror, I realized I didn't need to build another table to belong. I already had one. The first snow of December came early that year. Thick, soft flakes drifted through the gray morning light as I unlocked the doors to the Willow Room. The restaurant was quiet. No music, no chatter, just the hum of the heater and the silence so profound it seemed to pull the air from my lungs. I liked it that way. Before the chaos, before the guests, before the perfection. Just me and the silence. I walked through the dining room, my shoes clicking softly against the decorative stone floor. Every chair was in place, every glass polished to a shine. But when I reached the private dining room, the one that had started it all, I stopped. The table stood there empty, gleaming in the dim light. 10 chairs. 10 ghosts. I stepped closer, my hand brushing the surface. The wood was cold. A faint scratch ran along the edge, a scar from the night I'd faced my father. I traced it with my fingertip, the memory rushing back like static, his voice tight with disbelief, Daniel's silence, the sound of the door closing behind them. That table had once been a monument to pain. Now it was just wood and memory. I sank into one of the chairs, the same seat I'd taken that night. My reflection shimmered in the glass of the wine cabinet across the room. I looked composed, almost serene, but underneath I felt that familiar weight pressing in, the ache that comes when victory turns to quiet. Evan appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You're here early again," he said, stepping inside. I couldn't sleep. He handed me a mug and sat across from me. "You never sleep when it snows." I smiled faintly. It reminds me of when Mom used to bake pies. She said snow made the world taste sweeter. Was she right? Back then, maybe. I took a sip of coffee, the warmth steadying me. Now it just feels like quiet anticipation, like the air holding its breath. Evan studied me for a moment. "You've been quieter lately. Maybe I'm finally running out of things to prove." He smiled. "That's not a bad thing, Clara." I set the mug down and leaned back, staring at the table. This room used to feel like a wound. Now it feels like a pause, like the air's waiting for something to happen. "Maybe it's waiting for you to decide what comes after the fight," he suggested gently. That made me look up. For what? For surviving the only way you knew how. The words hung there, too soft to deflect. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Instead, I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the snow was falling faster now, dusting the city in white. Across the street, a father was pulling his daughter on a sled, her laughter carrying faintly through the glass. I watched them for a long moment. "Next week marks a year since Mom's gone," I said quietly. Evan nodded. "Are you planning anything I don't know?" I turned to face him. "Maybe dinner. Not for press. Not for prestige. Just for people who've been forgotten." He smiled. "That sounds like something she'd love." "Yeah," I said. "It does." The idea sat with me the rest of the day, growing roots. A dinner for the forgotten. For the people who had no table waiting for them. It felt right, like the kind of grace my mother used to talk about. By noon, the restaurant came alive again. The staff trickled in laughter echoing through the kitchen. I slipped on my apron, letting the rhythm of the day pull me forward, knife on cutting board, oil sizzling, the hum of order. But even in motion, my thoughts drifted. Every sound seemed to carry a memory. Evan calling out instructions reminded me of Dad's voice at family dinners. The smell of cinnamon and butter carried me back to my mother's kitchen. Late in the afternoon, Daniel stopped by. He looked more relaxed these days, more human. "Dad's home," he said. He's been asking about you. Good, I said, smiling. How's he doing? Better. He even tried making coffee this morning. That's brave. He burned it, Daniel said with a laugh. But he said he's going to cook Christmas breakfast. Grace is terrified. We both laughed, the sound warm and real. Then he looked around the restaurant, his expression softening. You know, this place feels different now. Lighter. I think I finally stopped haunting it, I said. He nodded, his eyes glinting. You should come by for dinner next week. Dad's planning something small. He wants you there. I hesitated. You think he's ready for that? Daniel smiled. I think you both are. After he left, I stood in the doorway of the private dining room again. The light was fading, snow still falling. The table gleamed in the dim glow, waiting. That night after closing, I brought a single plate from the kitchen, apple pie, still warm, just like Mom used to make. I set it at the head of the table and lit one candle. The flame flickered, reflecting in the wine glasses. I sat down and whispered quietly, "This is for all the Thanksgivings that went wrong, for every next time that never came." The air shifted, soft and still. I could almost hear her humming again, that tune she used to sing when she thought no one was listening. I closed my eyes. For the first time, the empty table didn't feel lonely. It felt complete. When I blew out the candle, the smoke curled upward like a sigh. I left the pie there untouched and walked out into the falling snow. The world was quiet, and for once the quiet didn't hurt. The phone rang just after dawn, its sharp tones slicing through the soft hum of the heater in my apartment. I almost didn't answer. It was too early, and the world outside was still wrapped in gray. But something, a pulse, an instinct, made me reach for it. "Clara Porter," a man's voice said. "This is Detective Collins with the Boston Police Department." My stomach dropped. "Yes, I'm calling about your father, Mr. Harold Porter." I gripped the counter, the room tilting slightly. "What happened? There was an incident last night," he said carefully. "Nothing life-threatening. He's at St. Mary's now. They think it was exhaustion. He was found sitting in his car outside a diner near the South End. He gave us your number." Exhaustion. The word didn't sound serious enough, but my heart was already racing. "Is he conscious?" "Yes, ma'am. Just weak. You can visit any time." I thanked him, hung up and stood there for a moment, my breath uneven. My coffee had gone cold. The city outside was waking up, buses, rumbling, snowplows, scraping, but everything in me felt still. Within an hour, I was driving across town, my fingers clenched around the steering wheel. The roads were slick, the sky pale. I'd spent so many years running from the role of daughter that I wasn't sure I remembered how to play it anymore. When I reached the hospital, the nurse at the front desk recognized the name right away. "Room 318, she said kindly. "He's been asking for you." The hallway smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. I hated hospitals, their false brightness, their quiet dread. I paused outside his door, steadying my breath before pushing it open. He was awake. Sitting up this time, eyes on the window where light spilled in over his bed. The TV played quietly in the background, some morning news show about the upcoming Christmas parade. When he turned his head and saw me, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "You came again," he said softly. "I always come," I replied. He chuckled weakly. "You didn't used to. That makes two of us." He laughed, then coughed, the sound dry and sharp. I poured a cup of water from the pitcher beside him and handed it over. His hands shook as he took it. "You shouldn't be driving alone," I said. "Especially in this weather." "I wasn't planning to," he said, his voice thin. "But after dinner I couldn't sleep. I went out for coffee. Thought I'd clear my head." "Coffee at midnight. That sounds like something Daniel would do." He smiled faintly. "Guess I needed to think." I sat in the chair beside his bed, watching him carefully. "What about—" He hesitated, looking down at his hands. "You. The restaurant. Everything that happened." The room felt thick, the air pressing down on us as the truth finally settled. "I keep seeing that night in my head," he said. "The look on your face when I told you the table was full. I thought I was doing what was practical. You know me always prioritizing order and efficiency, even if it meant cutting corners on human connection. Cutting corners? I repeated quietly. You erased me. He nodded. I did. Because I didn't know how to love a daughter who didn't need saving. I thought love meant control. Turns out it just meant fear. I looked at him for a long time. He wasn't the man who used to stand at the head of every table, the one whose approval I chased like sunlight. He looked human, smaller. He met my gaze. I wasn't angry at you for building that restaurant. I was angry that you didn't ask for my help. I didn't think you'd give it, I said. He gave a slow nod. You were right. We sat in silence for a while. The TV kept talking about the parade, a reporter's voice muffled beneath the hum of machines. I thought about all the times we tried to fill silence with noise radio chatter, at breakfast TV during dinner, anything to avoid words that mattered. He broke it first. Your mother would have handled this better. I smiled faintly. She would have made us talk sooner. She would have made me listen sooner, he said. His voice cracked at that, and I saw the years settle into his face, the weight of them, the cost of pride. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was tired. Tired of old stories replaying in my head like broken film. Dad, I said quietly, you don't have to keep apologizing. He looked at me sharply. I'm not sure I've said it enough. You have, I said. And maybe that's enough. He exhaled slow and uneven. You sound like her. I hope so. He closed his eyes for a moment, then reached toward the nightstand. There's something I wanted to give you. He handed me a small envelope yellowed at the edges. My name was written on it in his familiar blocky handwriting. What is it, I asked. Something from her things, he said. I found it last week. I didn't know how to give it to you before. I opened it carefully. Inside was a faded photograph, Mom standing in our old kitchen holding a pie dish and laughing at something beyond the frame. Behind her, I could see a small round table with mismatched chairs. On the back of the photo, written in her handwriting, were 4 words, Everyone deserves a seat. I swallowed hard. She wrote this, he nodded. She used to say it all the time. I never really understood what she meant until this year. I traced the words with my thumb. I think I do now. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The room was quiet but not empty. The kind of quiet that carries weight and warmth all at once. When I stood to leave, he caught my hand, his grip weak but sure. You're stronger than I ever was, he said. But don't let strength turn into solitude. I nodded, blinking back the tears I didn't want him to see. I'll try. He smiled. That's all I ever wanted. As I stepped out of the hospital, the air bit cold against my face, sharp and clean. Snow was falling again, soft flakes landing on my coat like small mercies. I looked down at the photograph in my hand. My mother's laughter frozen in time. The words on the back glowed faintly under the streetlight. Everyone deserves a seat. For the first time, I believed it. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, tucked between bills and restaurant invoices. The envelope was plain cream-colored with my name written in my father's uneven handwriting. I stood behind the counter at the Willow Room, holding it for a full minute before opening it. Something about the way my name looked in his pen, uneven, shaky, made me nervous. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Christmas dinner at home. Saturday, 6 p.m. Bring dessert. Love, Dad. No apology, no preamble. Just that. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Of course he'd make forgiveness sound like a grocery list. Evan appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. What's that, an invitation? I said. From my father. His eyebrows lifted. To dinner. Apparently I'm supposed to bring dessert. He smiled. That's progress. I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat pocket. We'll see. All day my thoughts drifted back to that note. It wasn't just the words, it was what they meant. He was asking me home. Not to a restaurant, not to a hospital, but home. That night when the restaurant closed, I stood alone in the kitchen rolling out pie dough on the counter. The smell of cinnamon and apples filled the air. I hadn't made this recipe in years, not since Mom died. I could still hear her voice, light and teasing. Don't rush the crust, Clara. Sweetness takes its time. By midnight, the pie was done golden brown edges slightly uneven, exactly the way she made it. I left it to cool, watching the snow drift outside the window. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The next few days passed in a blur of holiday chaos. Customers came and went, the restaurant buzzing with warmth and noise. But beneath it all, a quiet anticipation built in me. By Saturday evening, I was standing outside my father's house for the first time in years. The old porch light still flickered the familiar crack in the front step, making me pause just as it had when I was 10. Through the window, I could see movement shadows, laughter light. I took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened to reveal Daniel grinning like he'd been waiting all week. "You made it," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I said I would," I replied. He glanced down at the pie tin in my hands. "Let me guess, Apple Mom's recipe." His smile faltered just a little the way it always did when her name came up, but then he nodded. "Perfect. Come on in." The house smelled exactly the way it used to pine clove something roasting in the oven. For a second, I was 10 years old again, peeking into the kitchen while Mom scolded Dad for sneaking bites before dinner. Now the kitchen was quieter. But there he was. My father standing at the counter wearing an apron that looked far too new for him. When he saw me, he froze, then smiled. "You came," he said softly. "I brought dessert," I said, setting the pie down. He walked over slowly, as if afraid I might vanish if he moved too fast. "Your mother would have loved that smell," he murmured. "I think she's somewhere in it," I said. He laughed quietly, and for a moment the air between us softened. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Grace and the kids filled the table with chatter. Daniel kept pouring wine, and Dad. He just listened. Really listened. I watched him laugh with the grandkids, ask about school, and compliment Grace's cooking. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Halfway through the meal, he raised his glass. "I know we've had our share of broken dinners," he said. "But tonight, I just want to say thank you for giving me another chance to sit at this table." My chest tightened, and I saw Daniel blink hard, pretending not to. "To family," I said quietly, raising my glass. "To family," they echoed. After dinner, while the others moved to the living room, I stayed behind to clear the dishes. Dad joined me, towel in hand. "Old habits die hard," he said, drying a plate. "You never liked cleaning up before," I teased. "I'm learning," he said. "You were right, you know." "About what?" "That it's not about the table. It's about who gets a seat." I smiled faintly. "You read the back of Mom's photo, didn't you?" He chuckled. "I did. It took me a while to understand it." We stood in companionable silence, washing and drying, the rhythm easy and familiar. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for his approval. I just enjoyed his company. When we finished, he said, "You'll host next year?" I looked at him, startled. He smiled. "It's time the family sees your world." The Willow Room. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I nodded. "I'd like that." He leaned against the counter, tired but content. "Your mother used to say you'd change the way this family eats together." I never knew she meant it literally. We both laughed. It felt strange and good at once. Later, when I was leaving, he walked me to the door. The night was cold, but the snow glittering on the steps felt crisp, not biting like the difference between old anger and new peace. He handed me the folded note I'd brought with me earlier, his invitation. "Keep this," he said, "to remind you that sometimes it's worth saying the words out loud." I tucked it into my coat pocket. "Thank you for asking me home." He smiled. "Thank you for coming." As I drove away, the house lights glowed in the rearview mirror like a beacon. For years, that house had been a place I'd wanted to escape. Now it looked like what it was always supposed to be, home. When I reached the Willow Room, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was still faintly scented with cinnamon and oak. I set my keys on the counter and looked around the empty dining room. Tomorrow it would be filled again with families, laughter, and stories. People searching for the same thing I'd spent my whole life trying to find. Belonging. I touched the locket at my throat and whispered, "He's learning, Mom." Then softly, "So am I." Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the world in quiet light. Inside, the silence felt like peace. The morning after Christmas was still and pale, the light soft illuminating the empty dining room like a sacred space. The Willow Room was closed for the holiday, but I was there anyway, standing in the doorway of the dining room with a mug of coffee and the sound of snow melting against the windows. The tables were bare, the air faintly scented with cinnamon and roasted apples from the night before. It felt strange seeing the place so quiet after everything. No clinking dishes, no laughter spilling from the kitchen, just peace. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. I walked slowly between the tables, my fingertips brushing the edge of each one. Every nick and scratch in the wood told a story of families reunited, of quiet apologies, of people finding warmth in unexpected places. For years I'd thought of this restaurant as armor-proof, that I'd made it. But standing there that morning, it didn't feel like armor anymore. It felt like a home I'd built from all the pieces of myself I thought were too broken to use. Evan appeared in the doorway, his usual clipboard nowhere in sight. "You really don't take days off, do you?" I smiled over my shoulder. "Not when the place feels this quiet." He stepped inside, glancing around. "Quiet's good. You've earned it." Maybe I said, setting my mug on the counter. But quiet feels different now. Not empty. Just full. He studied me for a second, then grinned. "You sound like someone who's finally forgiven herself." "Maybe I have," I said. "At least I'm learning to." He leaned against the counter. "Your father called this morning." I raised an eyebrow. "Already? He said to tell you he wants to bring the whole family for New Year's Eve." I told him we're booked. I laughed. "You didn't." "I did. Then I told him you'd find a way to fit them in." I smiled, shaking my head. "You're not wrong." He gave a small nod toward the window. "Snow's still coming down. City's quiet. You should take a walk." "Maybe I will," I said, "after I finish something." He tilted his head. "What's that, an idea?" After he left, I went to my office and opened my notebook. On the first blank page, I wrote the title, "The People's Feast." Underneath, I scribbled the details: open seating, no reservations, free meals for anyone who walks in. A feast for those who have no table waiting for them. I didn't know if it would work or how I'd fund it, but I didn't care. For the first time, it didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like purpose. By afternoon, the snow had stopped. I locked up the restaurant and walked through the city, the air crisp and bright. Boston looked softer under snow, like it was forgiving itself for being cold. I found myself at the river, the same spot where I'd stood years ago when the Willow Room was just an idea on a napkin. The water moved slow beneath a thin film of ice. I pulled my coat tighter, the photograph from my mother tucked safely in my pocket. "Everyone deserves a seat." Her words had once felt like a comfort. Now they felt like a mission. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Daniel." "Hey," I said, answering. "Hey, yourself. Are you busy?" "Always," I said with a smile. "Why, Dad wants to know if you're saving him a table for New Year's. He's already bragging to Grace that you'll let him help in the kitchen." I laughed. "We'll see about that. He means it this time." Clara Daniel said, his voice softening. "He's trying." "I know," I said quietly. "So am I." We said goodbye, and I stood there for a while watching the water shift under the light. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, subway brakes, car horns, the hum of something alive and ongoing. When I finally returned to the restaurant that evening, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just stood in the doorway, letting the glow from the street lamps spill across the empty tables. In that soft amber light, every chair looked like an invitation. I walked to the private dining room, the same one where it had all started. The table gleamed in the quiet, each chair perfectly aligned. I sat at the head, just for a moment, running my fingers over the smooth wood. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who stood outside, waiting for someone to open the door. I thought of the woman who built this place brick by brick, recipe by recipe, until she no longer needed anyone's permission to belong. And I thought of my father sitting across from me now, not in anger but in peace. Of my mother, whose laughter still seemed to echo through every corner of this room. The ghosts didn't haunt me anymore. They kept me company. When I finally stood, I whispered to the room, "It's yours now. All of it." I turned off the lights and walked toward the front door, unlocking it as I always did before service. The night air rushed in cool and clean, carrying the sound of distant laughter. For years I had dreamed of belonging. I thought it would come from success, from power, from being the one in control. I realized belonging wasn't something you earned, but something you gave, just like my father was doing. The next day we opened for the holiday dinner. No reservations, no price tags, just warmth. People lined up outside, strangers, families, old friends. We served soup bread pie. There was laughter, music, and that electric kind of joy that fills a room when everyone realizes they've finally been seen. And somewhere in the crowd, I saw him, my father, standing near the back, smiling, handing out plates. When our eyes met, he raised his glass slightly, a silent toast. I nodded back, my throat too tight for words. Later, when the night ended and the tables were empty again, I stood at the door watching snow fall against the glow of the streetlights. Evan joined me, leaning against the frame. "You did it," he said. "A full house." "Yeah," I said. "And no one left out." He smiled. "So what now?" I looked out at the snow. "Now," I said, "we keep the doors open." He nodded, satisfied. "You're really not going to stop, are you?" "Not until every seat is filled." Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in white. Inside, the warmth lingered, soft, steady, alive. As I turned off the last light, I whispered the words my mother had written all those years ago. "Everyone deserves a seat." And this time, it wasn't a memory. It was a promise.